So we are in Washington, July 29, 1974. We are reading the memorandum from the Counselor of the Department of State, Mr. Sonnenfeldt, which was sent to the Secretary of State, Mr. Kissinger. So the subject, latest Soviet note on Cyprus, and also talk with Vorontsov. He started with Vorontsov, okay? So the counselor has a call with Mr. Vorontsov. Morning. The important thing is that he mentioned the United Nations Security Council. I mean, the action. So Vorontsov, the Soviet guy, said that it was a good thing for people to work around the clock because the situation has to be brought under control. Okay, so we are in also in Geneva, night and day. It was the answer. They just said that they want to keep in touch. And by the way, Vorontsov said, don't disappear. It seems to be like a joke, but remember that if it is mentioned in the memorandum, is to say something. Okay. And I mean, it's obvious that is important. So the Soviets are working with Lygeros in New York. So this is a mention, you remember? So we have a proof. And Lygeros is also in close touch with them. So this is a proof. We are in July 29, and there is a mention about the work between the Soviets and Lygeros. So now you don't need to believe me. The only real program seems to be to keep Lygeros in play and to somehow get him into the diplomatic process in Geneva. So you remember that Lygeros was not in Geneva, of course, but they want for him to play a role, okay? So you see that they don't care about the invasion. This is known. And we have another proof just after the mention of the resolution 353. They continue to be ambiguous as regards the Turks. Okay? And for me, another important point is the following. Apparently, there has been some direct Soviet-Turkish contact. So this is another important point. So you see that Lygeros is in contact with the Soviets in New York. We have also the mention of Lygeros. And the counselor thinks, at least, that there is a contact between Soviets and Turks. One was a meeting between the Soviet ambassador and the Turkish defense minister. So he mentioned this just to say that at least this meeting was done. But we don't know exactly what they want, except, of course, this is mentioned as a truism, that the longer the present situation continues, the more entry the Soviets will acquire. Okay, so it is for the Soviets a big interest to have the continuation of the invasion. That's why they do not mention anything about them, even in the letter of Brezhnev to Nixon. The next point, which is mentioned, we are going and we are doing, and the Soviets obviously know we are doing. So both of them are doing many things in this diplomatic game. They don't know exactly, but the position of the Americans is that so far in New York, the British have carried the load of argument against the Soviet position. What does it mean? It means that, in fact, the British proposition, which was clear, was an argument against the Soviet position. You remember that the Soviet position is only we need Lygeros again, 1 point, and in fact, no Greeks in the island. For the British, the point is rather different. And of course, for the American, is totally different. So it just said that, remember that there is the British position under pressure, okay, because they carried the load of the argument against the Soviet position. And you see something which is in italics, I still see no value in sending a written communication to the Soviets. So he prefers to have no written communication and just to react orally. Next point, there is a lie from the Soviets. They said to the Greeks, see the mention, the Soviets told the Greeks that the dispatch of their observer to Geneva was the result of agreement between us. We have, of course, denied this. But any written communication suggesting US-Soviet cooperation would undermine our position with the Greeks and Turks and imply US-Soviet collusion. So, you see, there is a double game. US-Soviet Union, Greeks, Turks, and they don't want to show at that point that there is a collaboration. In fact, it's not exactly collaboration because there is no collusion, of course. It's just an antagonism about the situation because we have totally different position. That's why this fact was mentioned. In summary, therefore, if you agree, so if you agree, it is a reference to Kissinger. I think I should call Vorontsov at the end of the day to say what? 3 points. Of course, many others are mentioned, but I think these 3 points are more important. That, of course, the interests of Cyprus are not being ignored. Okay, it's 1 point. In any case, it's related also with the position of the Soviets. The second one is we don't like the accusatory tone of Soviet statements and communication. And the explanation is they imply an adversary position when our entire proposal has been to find a solution acceptable to all directly concerned without making this an international dispute. So the US are trying what? To avoid an international dispute and to say that, okay, we are trying to find a solution which is acceptable. Of course, the problem is the ceasefire, you remember. But the Soviets have always an accusatory tone in their statements, in their communication. So the chancellor wants to at least mention this, and said, we should say, we don't like this. You see, it's not totally diplomatic, but it means something. The third point is we continue to hope the Soviets will desist from anything that might inflame the situation. The explanation, they are trying to avoid direct contact between the Soviets and the Turks on the ground, not in New York, because it was done. Maybe something about the boats and the fleet there, to avoid maybe between Attila 1 and Attila 2 something. We don't know, we are just in July 29. But in any case, he said, adversely affect the already difficult climate in which the parties are attempting to work out a solution. So you see that the American position is we are trying to find something, we are trying to play together to obtain an acceptable solution. And for Soviets, the game is different. And it was mentioned at the beginning of the memorandum that the longer the present situation continues, the more entry the Soviets will acquire. So it's benefit for Soviets to keep the invasion at the same level. For us, as we are with us, it's a problem, a very serious problem. And it's important to know that it was known by not only, of course, the Chancellor, but also the Secretary of State, Mr. Kissinger.